Why did no one ever notice her? At the library desk, she sat quietly stamping dates into borrowed books, her soft voice barely above a whisper when she spoke to patrons. To most people in Cedar Falls, Sarah Martinez was just the quiet librarian. 23. Brown hair tied back in a plain ponytail, a shy smile that seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. If she was remembered at all, it was for kindness, not courage. But there were nights no one knew about. Nights when Sarah drove 15 miles out of town, headlights cutting through the dark, until she reached an abandoned quarry hidden behind tall trees and jagged rock. There, under the moonlight, she laid out a black rifle case. Her hands moved with a precision no one would have expected. She would lie flat on the cold earth, steady her breathing, and squeeze the trigger. The crack of each shot echoed against stone walls, fading into the night as if the world itself was holding its breath. Why was a librarian doing this? The answer reached back more than a decade. Sarah had been 11 when the lessons began. Her father, Michael Martinez, was no ordinary man, a decorated sniper, 3 tours overseas, a soldier who carried scars no one could see. When he returned from war, the nightmares followed him home. He checked locks twice each night, jumped at sudden noises, and sometimes sat awake until dawn with his rifle case open, staring at the weapon like it held all the questions of his life. Yet when Sarah was near him, something softened. One summer evening she sat crying in their backyard, her small frame curled on the old wooden swing her father had built years earlier. Bullies at school had been relentless. They pushed her, mocked her quietness, made her dread each morning. Through tears, she whispered, "Dad, I wish I was brave like you." Michael sat beside her, his arm resting gently across her shoulders. The sunset painted his weary face orange and gold. "Bravery isn't about not being scared, mija," he said softly, using the Spanish endearment he always saved for her. "It's about knowing you can protect yourself and the people you love. Do you want me to teach you something special?" That night, Sarah's education began. It didn't start with shooting. It started with discipline, with listening, with stillness. Michael showed her how to sit quietly until her breath matched the rhythm of the wind in the trees, how to slow her heart until her pulse felt steady in her fingertips. Then came the rifle, respect before skill, safety before speed. "This isn't about power," her father told her. "It's about responsibility." Every weekend they drove to a private range owned by his old Army buddy Frank Morrison. Frank was gruff, missing his left leg from an explosion in Afghanistan, but his hands were steady and his eyes sharp. "Your father was the best shot in our unit," he told Sarah one Saturday. "But it wasn't his aim that made him different. It was his patience, his calm. That's what kept him alive." Sarah listened. She absorbed everything. By 12, she was steady. By 13, remarkable. By 15, she could group shots within inches at distances that made Frank whistle under his breath. But then came the tragedy that shattered her family. Michael Martinez never made it home one evening. A drunk driver ran a red light. His car was crushed. He was gone instantly. Sarah's world fractured. Her mother, Alina, collapsed under grief, barely functioning through bills and endless hospital paperwork. Sarah, still a teenager, carried her father's memory like a weight across her shoulders. Frank stepped in. He had lost his brother in arms, and in Sarah he saw a chance to honor Michael's legacy. Their secret lessons continued. He drilled her harder than before. Each shot was a promise that she wouldn't waste what her father had given her. "Your father would want you strong," Frank said one night at the quarry. His voice cracked as he adjusted her stance. "The world, it can be cruel, but you don't have to be its victim." Sarah promised. Years passed. She graduated high school but stayed in Cedar Falls, unwilling to abandon her mother. She took the librarian job, quiet, simple, steady. By day she stamped books, helped children find fairy tales, and listened to old ladies discuss romance novels. By night she returned to the quarry. Lying beneath the stars, she became someone else. Each shot was a conversation with her father. Each target pierced was proof she hadn't let grief consume her. But she told no one. Not her coworkers, not the kind police officer who sometimes stopped by the library for coffee, not even the young men who asked her out on awkward dates she always declined. To them, she was soft-spoken Sarah, a girl who wouldn't hurt a fly. They had no idea. Her hands were steadier than most soldiers, her calculations faster than trained officers. Wind, distance, elevation, she measured them instinctively. Sometimes Frank just stared at her in silence, shaking his head. "You've surpassed him," he admitted one evening. "Even your father. You're once in a generation, Sarah." But she didn't believe in glory. She believed in silence. Until September 15th. It began like any other Tuesday. Sarah unlocked the oak doors of the library, the faint smell of old paper and fresh coffee greeting her. She brought blueberry muffins from Murphy's Bakery for the senior citizens book group, setting them on a plate with quiet care. At 10 o'clock, laughter filled the library as retirees debated whether a fictional heroine should choose the farmer or the painter. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself peace. Then came the shouting. Car horns blared outside. People ran through the streets toward the square. Sarah froze, books in her hands, her stomach tightening. Through the tall front windows, she saw faces twisted in panic. Police Officer Tom Bradley burst in, sweat dripping down his temples. "Everyone away from the windows. Stay inside." His voice trembled, urgent. "There's a man on the roof of City Hall, armed, firing into the square." Gasps spread through the library. Mothers pulled their children close. Elderly patrons clutched trembling hands. Sarah's pulse hammered. "3 wounded already," Tom said. "EMTs couldn't reach them. Back up 30 minutes away." And suddenly, something inside her shifted. The librarian was gone. Her breathing slowed. Her hands no longer shook. The calculations began in her head, angles, distances, sightlines. 4 blocks from the library roof to City Hall, about 430 yards. She could make that shot. But to reveal herself. Her father's voice whispered in memory. "With great skill comes great responsibility." Sarah turned toward the back door. Her decision was already made. What kind of librarian carries a rifle case in her car? Tom Bradley didn't believe what he was seeing. Sarah Martinez, the quiet young woman who had handed him coffee 100 times, now stood at her trunk, lifting out a black case as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. Her expression was calm, her movements precise. "Sarah, stop," Tom pleaded, his voice breaking. "This isn't a movie. That man up there will kill you." She met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "Tom, if we wait 25 minutes for backup, more people die. I can't let that happen." "You don't even—" "My father was Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez," she cut in. "He taught me everything. You need to trust me." For a moment, Tom saw something in her eyes he couldn't reconcile. Gone was the shy librarian. In her place stood a soldier's daughter, carrying a presence that felt older than her years. She closed the trunk, slung the case over her shoulder, and walked toward the fire escape ladder at the back of the library. Tom reached for her arm. "Sarah, please don't do this." She pulled free, firm but gentle. "Keep everyone safe inside. That's your job. This is mine." She didn't wait for him to answer. Her boots clanged softly against the metal rungs as she climbed. Each movement was fluid, practiced. The library roof wasn't high, but from there she'd have a line of sight toward City Hall. Wind brushed her face when she reached the top, carrying distant echoes of panic, car horns, cries for help, the crack of gunfire. She laid the rifle case down and unlatched it. The weapon wasn't ordinary. Piece by piece, she and Frank had built it over years. Every component had a story. The stock fitted to her shoulder like it was made for her. The scope tuned perfectly to her eye. She assembled it with mechanical calm, every click and twist muscle memory. As the rifle came together, so did her mind. The librarian was gone. In her place, the student of a legendary sniper. She lay prone behind the low concrete barrier, backpack braced beneath the rifle for stability. Through the scope, City Hall sharpened into view. There he was. The shooter crouched behind a decorative stone column on the northeast corner, barrel protruding, jerking forward every few seconds. He leaned out, fired toward the square, then ducked back. Erratic movements, too fast, too emotional, not trained, but dangerous enough. Sarah's jaw tightened. This wasn't combat. This was cruelty. She watched him toy with a wounded man crawling across the pavement, aiming close enough to terrify but not to finish, enjoying the fear. Her finger hovered near the trigger, but she pulled it back. Patience. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. A good sniper doesn't rush. You read the whole picture first. She shifted her scope lower, sweeping the square. The three wounded Tom had mentioned, they were motionless, trapped in open view. An elderly man crawled, blood streaking behind him. By the playground, a woman shielded two small children behind the slide, her body trembling but her arms unmoving as she clutched them close. Another shot cracked from the roof of City Hall. Dust exploded near the crawling man's hand. The shooter was toying with him. Sarah's chest tightened. She keyed Tom's frequency into her radio. Tom, this is Sarah. I have eyes on the shooter. Static crackled, then Tom's panicked voice. Sarah, get down. Get off that roof right now. State police will be here soon. Too late, she said softly. He's on the northeast corner behind a stone column, not professionally trained. He's targeting anyone who moves. Silence on the line, then Tom's voice again, angry, desperate. Sarah, I don't care what your father taught you. This isn't your responsibility. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes stayed fixed in the scope. The shooter leaned out again, this time swinging his barrel toward the playground, toward the woman and her children. Sarah's pulse spiked, but her voice on the radio was steady. Tom, he's aiming at the kids. You have maybe 10 seconds to distract him, or I take the shot. Sarah, no. But the calculations were already done. Distance, 437 yards. Wind, 3 miles per hour southwest. Temperature, 72 degrees, clear trajectory. Her world narrowed to a tunnel, just her, the scope, and the target. The chaos of Cedar Falls fell away. She could hear her own heartbeat slowing, her father's lessons whispered in her mind. Breathe steady, don't fight the trigger, invite it. The shooter steadied his rifle, his finger moved. Sarah's breath paused. Her trigger broke clean, the rifle cracked. Through the scope, she saw the man jerk backward, his weapon spinning from his hands and clattering down the roof slope before tumbling into the alley below. His body slumped behind the stone column. Still. The square went silent. Sarah didn't move. Her scope stayed trained, waiting for signs of life. Nothing. Only the ringing in her ears and the faint crackle of Tom's voice breaking through. Sarah, did you just? Target is down, she said calmly. Below, the square erupted into motion. People darted from cover. Men rushed to the wounded. The woman by the playground collapsed, clutching her children to her chest as she sobbed. Relief rippled through the crowd like a wave. Sarah exhaled slowly, lowering her cheek from the rifle. She began disassembling it with the same steady precision. Piece by piece, she packed it away, hands calm, face unreadable. Tom's voice again, shaky. Sarah, the state police are gonna want to talk to you. You need to stay put. I understand, she said softly. For the first time, her hands hesitated. She sat back against the concrete, staring out over the square. Relief mingled with something heavier, sadness. Sadness that a man had chosen to turn a peaceful morning into blood and chaos. And beneath it all, something else. Quiet satisfaction. Her father's lessons had lived in her, had mattered. She whispered under her breath, voice catching slightly. I hope I made you proud, Dad. Sirens wailed closer. Red and blue lights painted the edges of the square. Officers spread out, cautious, rifles aimed upward as they approached City Hall. Paramedics rushed to the wounded at last. Sarah stayed still. She had ended it, but she also knew nothing about her life would ever be the same again. How long could she sit there, pretending to be calm? The library roof was rough beneath her elbows, the rifle case sealed at her side. Sirens echoed off the buildings of Cedar Falls, growing louder, closer. Down below, the square pulsed with chaos that was finally shifting into relief. Medics running, neighbors sobbing, children being pulled into the arms of parents who thought they might never see them again. Sarah stayed still. Her body felt steady, almost too steady, as if adrenaline had missed her entirely. She had imagined this moment countless times at the quarry, each shot a rehearsal for something she never thought would happen. And now it had. A man was dead because of her, but children were alive. Mothers were still holding their sons and daughters. Strangers had been pulled back from the edge of tragedy. And she knew one shot had changed everything. The creak of the fire escape broke her silence. Heavy boots climbed, the sound metallic and deliberate. She didn't flinch. When the figure appeared over the roof's edge, Sarah was already waiting, rifle case locked, hands folded on her knees. "Miss Martinez." The woman's voice was firm but controlled. Sarah looked up. Detective Maria Santos, mid-40s, sharp eyes, gray threaded into black hair pulled tight in a bun. Her badge caught the light as she stepped onto the roof. She had the bearing of someone who'd seen too many crime scenes and carried every one of them in her posture. "I'm Detective Santos, State Police." She kept her distance, hands visible. "I need to ask you about what just happened." Sarah nodded once. "I understand." For a long moment the detective studied her, the calm, the folded hands, the steady gaze. Most people shook after taking a life. Most broke down. But Sarah sat there like the air itself had cooled her blood. "Can you tell me in your own words what you did?" Santos asked. Sarah's voice was soft but even. "I saw the shooter, northeast corner of City Hall's roof. He had clear sight of the square. People were pinned down, wounded. Backup was too far away. I made the decision to stop him before more were killed." The detective's brows lifted slightly. She scribbled into her notebook. "Made the decision. That was a 437-yard shot. Center mass. Windy conditions. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah hesitated. The words felt heavy in her mouth. This was the secret she'd carried for 12 years, the second life she had never spoken of to anyone outside Frank. "My father," she said quietly. "Staff Sergeant Michael Martinez. He trained me from when I was 11. After he died, his friend Frank Morrison continued." Detective Santos paused her writing. "Frank Morrison, the same Frank Morrison who owns the gun shop out on Route 9. "Yes, ma'am. He served with my father in Afghanistan. He taught me after." "And you've been practicing all these years?" Sarah's jaw tensed. For a second she considered softening the truth, but the detective's eyes demanded it. "Yes, several times a week, at an abandoned quarry outside town, for 12 years. Santos leaned back slightly. She did the math in her head, 12 years of disciplined training, guided by professionals. She had interviewed hundreds of shooters, officers, even combat veterans. But this young librarian had just revealed herself as something altogether different. "You understand what you did today is extraordinary," Santos said. Sarah shook her head. "It was necessary." For the first time since climbing onto the roof, her hands trembled. Not from fear of the shot, that moment had been pure stillness. The tremor came now in the quiet after. She pressed them together in her lap, hiding the shake. Detective Santos noticed anyway. She softened her voice. "Miss Martinez, it's normal to feel it after. You saved lives today, but you also took one. That doesn't leave easily." Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to answer, but the weight of the truth sat heavy on her chest. Below, the scene shifted again. Paramedics lifted the crawling man onto a stretcher. Children sobbed into their mothers' arms. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering and pointing toward the library roof. Toward her. She had been invisible yesterday. Today, she was something else entirely. The detective closed her notebook. "We'll need a full statement at headquarters. For now, I want you to stay here until we clear the scene." Sarah nodded. Minutes bled into an hour. Questions came from Santos, from uniformed officers, later from an FBI agent with sharp glasses and sharper questions. Where had she learned to breathe steady under fire? How did she calculate wind drift so quickly? Why had she stepped forward when others froze? Her answers were always the same. Her father, his training, a sense of duty she couldn't explain. Through it all, Sarah felt a quiet fracture opening inside her. She had kept this part of herself hidden for so long, wrapped in silence and night. Now it was spilling into daylight, into the eyes of officials and strangers. What would her mother say when she found out? By late afternoon, the question slowed. The shooter's name was confirmed: David Brennan, a man with a record of mental illness, recently unemployed, spiraling downward. He had come to City Hall with a rifle and a plan to make the world feel his anger. Authorities whispered estimates: 20, 30 people could have died if he hadn't been stopped. Sarah didn't flinch at the numbers. She only thought of the two children at the playground, the woman who had covered them with her own body, the elderly man bleeding on the pavement. Those were the faces she had aimed for, not the man behind the scope, but the lives he threatened. As the sun sank, Detective Santos finally said, "Miss Martinez, you're free to go. We'll need you for follow-ups. But for today, go home. Be with your family." Home. The word felt strange now. Sarah descended the fire escape. On the street below, people were gathered. Some clapped. Some stared in awe. Others only looked confused, trying to reconcile the quiet librarian with the impossible shot that had ended their nightmare. Mrs. Patterson stood near the library entrance, tears streaking her cheeks. She stepped forward and gripped Sarah's hands. "Sarah, those children, they were my grandchildren." Sarah's composure cracked. Her lips trembled as she pulled the older woman into an embrace. For the first time that day, the weight of what she had done hit her, not the kill, but the save. As she pulled away, Tom Bradley stepped forward. His face was pale, his voice rough. "Sarah, I tried to stop you. I thought you'd die up there. I didn't know." "You were doing your job," she said softly, "and I was doing mine." He shook his head, still trying to understand. "The mayor wants to see you tomorrow. Ceremony, recognition. The whole town's talking about you already." Sarah stiffened. Recognition. She didn't want it. She wanted silence, books, and the quiet comfort of anonymity. But the eyes around her told her that was gone forever. That night she drove home slowly. The roads of Cedar Falls looked the same: neat houses, children's bicycles in front yards, porch lights glowing softly, but nothing felt the same. On the porch, her mother was waiting. Elena's eyes were red, her hands trembling as she clutched the news still playing on the small TV inside. She rose as Sarah stepped from the car, walking toward her daughter like she was approaching someone unfamiliar. "Mija, the news says you shot someone today." Sarah swallowed hard, her voice broke as she answered, "Mama, I did, and I saved lives." She told her everything: the training, the nights at the quarry, the promise to her father. Every secret she had carried alone for 12 years spilled into the night air. Elena listened in silence, tears glistening. When Sarah finished, her mother took her hands, squeezing them tight. "Your father would be proud of you today, so proud. You saved innocent lives just like he did." For the first time in years, Sarah let herself lean into her mother's arms. She was no longer the quiet librarian. She was no longer invisible. She was something else now, something her father had always known she might become. And as neighbors walked by, waving, whispering, pointing, Sarah realized the truth she had feared. Her secret life was over. Why couldn't the world just forget? Sarah woke the next morning to the sound of voices outside. She pulled the curtain back and froze. News vans lined the street. Cameras on tripods pointed toward her front door. Reporters spoke breathlessly into microphones, gesturing toward the quiet little house where the librarian sniper lived. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since 6 a.m. calls from television producers, state newspapers, radio stations. Even names she recognized, CNN, CBS, networks she had only ever watched from her couch. Each one wanted the same thing: the story of the young woman who had saved Cedar Falls with a single impossible shot. Sarah's mother moved quietly around the kitchen trying to preserve routine. Coffee brewed, toast sat on plates, but her hands trembled as she poured. "Mama," Sarah whispered, sitting at the table, "I don't want any of this." Alina placed a cup of coffee in front of her and squeezed her shoulder. "Mija, what you did, people are desperate for hope. They want to believe ordinary people can still do extraordinary things." "I'm not extraordinary," Sarah muttered. "I did what Papa taught me, that's all." But outside, the voices grew louder, reporters calling her name, asking how she felt if she would make a statement. The knock came mid-morning. Sarah peeked through the window. Frank Morrison stood on the porch, his weathered face carrying both pride and concern. She opened the door quickly, pulling him inside before the reporters swarmed. "Girl," Frank said, shaking his head, "you've got the whole town buzzing. I just came from the diner. They're calling you the best shot anyone's ever heard of." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Frank, are the police going to come after you for training me? I don't want you dragged into this." He waved a hand. "Already talked to Detective Santos. Everything we did was legal. You were old enough. Even before your father had every right to train his daughter. You don't worry about me." The phone rang again. Alina picked it up, voice tired. "Martinez residence. No, she's not giving interviews today. I don't care if you're from CNN, the answer is still no. Thank you." She hung up and exhaled. "That's the 15th call this morning." Sarah pressed her palms to her face. "I just want this to go away." Frank leaned forward. His eyes, usually sharp with critique, now softened. "Sarah, listen to me. Yesterday's shot, it wasn't luck, it was perfect. Distance, conditions, pressure, you nailed it. That kind of skill, used at the right moment, changes lives. Your father would be proud beyond words." Sarah swallowed hard, blinking fast. She didn't answer. By noon, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Out stepped Mayor Patricia Williams, a small woman in her 60s who had run Cedar Falls with quiet determination for a decade. She had often come into the library for historical records. Now her face was solemn, respectful. "Sarah, I hope I'm not intruding," the mayor said gently. "I wanted to thank you. You saved this town." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want a big ceremony, Mayor." But the mayor shook her head. "Sarah, 3 of our neighbors were wounded. Many more could have died. The families want to thank you personally. And frankly, in a world filled with tragedy, your story is giving people hope." Sarah looked at Frank, at her mother. Both nodded gently. "What do you have in mind?" Sarah asked. "Nothing elaborate," the mayor promised. "A gathering in the square, some words, a chance for people to heal together." Sarah exhaled slowly. "All right, if it helps them." That afternoon, she allowed one interview with Jim Henderson, the local newspaper reporter who had covered Cedar Falls for 15 years. Jim was kind, respectful, and patient. They met in the library, her sanctuary, though now it felt like a stage. "Sarah," Jim began softly, notebook open, "how does a librarian learn to shoot like a sniper?" She told him, her father's training, Frank's mentorship, the years of silent practice at the quarry. She explained she had never intended to use it, but when lives were on the line, she couldn't stand by. "My father always said," she told Jim, "if you have the power to save lives and you don't act, then you share the blame for what happens. Yesterday, I couldn't let that happen." Jim scribbled quickly, his eyes wide. "And in that moment," he asked, "when you aimed, what were you thinking?" Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the scope, the children behind the slide, the shooter's finger tightening. I wasn't thinking about difficulty or consequences, just about stopping him before he hurt them. The article appeared the next day. Headline: Quiet Courage, How Cedar Falls Librarian Became an Unlikely Hero. The story spread. State newspapers reprinted it. By Friday, Sarah's phone buzzed with calls from producers, book publishers, even a Hollywood agent. She turned them all down. She wanted her life back. Saturday morning arrived, and the town gathered in the same square where terror had unfolded just days earlier. About 200 people stood together, neighbors, families, survivors. The wounded were there, one leaning on a walker, another wrapped in bandages but refusing to miss it. Mrs. Chen, the woman who had shielded her grandchildren at the playground, approached Sarah with tears streaming. She wrapped her arms around her. "Those children are my world. You saved them. I'll never forget." The elderly man who had crawled bleeding across the pavement stood tall with his walker, his voice rough but strong. "Young lady, what you did took courage most of us never find in a lifetime. Your father taught you well." When Mayor Williams spoke, her voice trembled with emotion. She presented Sarah with a key to the city and declared her an honorary deputy sheriff. The crowd cheered. Sarah stepped to the microphone reluctantly, her heart pounding. She hated the eyes on her, but she owed them words. "I want to thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying across the square. "But please understand, I'm not special. My father was a hero. Frank Morrison is a hero. The true heroes are the first responders who put themselves at risk every day. I was just someone who happened to be prepared." Her words were simple, honest, and the crowd respected them. Afterward, Detective Santos approached quietly, her hands folded behind her back. "Miss Martinez, have you ever considered a career in law enforcement?" Sarah blinked, startled. "Detective, I'm happy as a librarian. I don't want to carry a gun for a living." "I understand," Santos said, "but your skills are extraordinary. We could use you on our tactical team, not patrol, special cases. Lives saved because of precision. Think about it." Sarah nodded, uncertain. As the ceremony ended, she stood apart from the crowd, watching children laugh again in the same place where fear had paralyzed them days before. She realized this was what mattered: not medals, not ceremonies, not headlines. Just children laughing, mothers breathing again, neighbors safe. But the whispers around her told her a truth she couldn't escape. She was no longer invisible. No matter how much she wanted her quiet life, people now looked at her differently. They saw the impossible shot, the calm under pressure. They saw her father's legacy alive in her. She drove home that evening with her rifle case in the trunk, the library keys in her purse, and a heart heavy with the realization that her secret world had collided with the public one. Maybe she couldn't go back. Why did the silence feel heavier now? Sarah stood at the front desk of the Cedar Falls Library on Monday morning, scanning barcodes and sliding books across the counter. The routines were the same: children laughing in the corner, Mrs. Patterson humming as she sorted returns, the faint smell of old pages and fresh coffee. But the air was different. Patrons lingered longer when they looked at her. Some whispered. Some smiled nervously, as if speaking to her now carried new weight. Others avoided her altogether, unsure how to treat the librarian who had turned into a sniper overnight. A little girl tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Martinez," she whispered, eyes wide, "my dad says you're a hero." Sarah knelt down, meeting the child's gaze. "Your dad is wrong," she said softly. "I just did what needed to be done." But the girl shook her head, smiling shyly. "I think you're brave." Sarah forced a smile, though inside her stomach tightened. Brave. That word belonged to her father, not her. When the girl skipped away, Sarah returned to her work, but her focus drifted. The library had always been her sanctuary, the one place where she was invisible, defined only by kindness and routine. Now it felt like a stage. Every movement, every word, seemed to carry a shadow of what she had done on that rooftop. At lunch, Mrs. Patterson approached her gently. "Sarah, dear, people are curious. They don't understand how you became who you are. You can't blame them." Sarah sighed, staring down at her sandwich. "I don't want to be someone. I want to be no one." The older woman smiled sadly. "Sometimes we don't get to choose." By afternoon, reporters were back outside, waiting for her to leave. She slipped out the rear door, exhausted by the weight of eyes. She missed the quiet of the quarry, the stars above her scope, the voice of her father in her head. But even the quarry felt different now. That night, lying prone on the familiar ground, Sarah aimed at distant targets. Each shot landed perfect, tight groups within inches, but the silence after each crack of the rifle no longer felt like meditation. It felt like memory. She saw the man's body slump, his rifle falling. She heard the screams in the square, the radio static in her ear. The shot had been perfect, but it hadn't been practice. And that truth echoed louder than the rifle itself. Days passed. The phone calls didn't stop. Her mother fielded most of them, her voice tired but protective. "No, she's not interested. Please stop calling." Frank dropped by often, his presence grounding her. He spoke to her with the same mixture of pride and caution he always had. "Sarah, you can't put this back in the box. What you did is out there now. People will always see it." "I never wanted them to," she said, setting her rifle down on the quarry table. "Papa taught me so I'd be safe, that's all." "Maybe he taught you so you'd be ready," Frank countered. "Safe for yourself, yes, but also for others." She didn't answer, she didn't want to. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, a knock came at the door. Detective Santos stood there, calm, deliberate. "May I come in?" she asked. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. They sat in the kitchen, coffee steaming between them. Alina moved quietly in the background, listening but not intruding. "Sarah," Santos began, "I'll be direct. You have a gift. You saved lives with it, but Cedar Falls won't be the last place where innocent people are threatened. We could use someone like you." Sarah shook her head. "I'm a librarian detective. I stamp books. I don't want to carry a gun for a living." Santos leaned forward, eyes sharp. "I'm not asking you to walk a beat. I'm asking you to consider special work, tactical response, cases where precision saves lives. Not every situation can be handled with negotiation or brute force. Sometimes it takes one person with steady hands." The words pierced her. One person with steady hands. That had been her father's mantra. "I can't," Sarah whispered. "Can't or woe." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Santos stood. "I won't push, but think about it. You've already stepped into the fire once, and you didn't flinch." After the detective left, Alina placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Mija, maybe she's right. Maybe this is why your father trained you." Sarah shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. "He trained me to survive, not to be used." But that night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her father's voice echoing in her memory. With great skill comes great responsibility. She hated that part of her agreed with Santos. By Friday, the tension deepened. A new article hit the state newspaper, "The Librarian Sniper, from Cedar Falls to the Nation's Attention." They called her disciplined, fearless, extraordinary. They called her father a legend and her a legacy. At the library, she overheard whispers. "Do you think she'll join the police? They say she's better than soldiers. I feel safer just knowing she's here." Sarah gripped the desk until her knuckles whitened. She didn't want to be their safety. She wanted to be herself. But who was she now? That evening she returned to the quarry. She lay prone, scope trained on a target half a mile away. She lined up the shot, breath steady, fired. The round struck dead center. She closed her eyes. For a moment she could almost hear her father's voice again. Proud, steady, telling her she had done what she was meant to do. And yet when she opened her eyes, the target wasn't just paper anymore. It was a man slumping backward, a rifle falling from his hands. Sarah sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. She wasn't trembling, but she was breaking inside. Her gift had saved lives, but it had also taken one. And that truth would follow her wherever she went. What happens when the world comes calling? 6 months had passed since the shot that changed everything. Sarah still worked at the library 3 days a week, shelving books, guiding children through fairy tales, sipping coffee with patrons who no longer saw her as invisible. But on the other 2 days, she drove north, past the quiet farms and rolling hills, to the state police headquarters. She wasn't an officer. She refused the badge, the uniform, the oath. But Detective Santos had found a compromise. Sarah was a civilian consultant, an overwatch specialist, called in only when lives balanced on the edge of violence. She could still be the librarian Cedar Falls needed, but she was also something more now. And it terrified her. Her first call-out had been a hostage crisis in Springfield. A desperate man, armed and broken, had trapped 6 people inside a bank. Negotiators worked tirelessly, but time was running thin. Sarah's job had been simple: eyes on target, precision if needed. She lay on a rooftop across the street, scope steady. The man raised his rifle, shouting threats. Her finger brushed the trigger, and instead of aiming at him, she aimed at the weapon. One shot snapped through steel, disabling the gun. The man froze, stunned. Negotiators convinced him to surrender moments later. No one died. The second case was worse. A veteran, haunted and suicidal, barricaded himself on a bridge with explosives strapped to his chest. Police closed roads, negotiators pleaded. But when he reached for the detonator, Sarah's bullet severed the wires from 800 yards. He collapsed in sobs, alive, and later in treatment. Each mission left her shaken. Each reinforced her father's words: with great skill comes great responsibility. But the nightmares returned. She dreamed of scopes filled with faces, of fingers on triggers, of choices made in fractions of seconds. She dreamed of David Brennan, the man she killed on the rooftop, his eyes staring through her scope. One evening in the library, she caught her reflection in the tall window glass. Not the shy librarian anymore. Not the girl who once hid behind her father's shoulder. Someone else. Someone the world now looked to when it was desperate. And she hated it. It was late winter when the call came. Sarah was at headquarters, sitting in a small office they had given her: plain desk, locked cabinet for her equipment, a window overlooking the training fields where recruits stumbled through drills. She preferred the library, but here at least she could feel her purpose clearly. Detective Santos appeared in the doorway. Her face, usually calm, was drawn tight. "Sarah, we've got a situation." Sarah stood. "Where?" "Millbrook Elementary School, armed suspect inside. He's a former student, mental health issues, unstable. No shots fired yet, but he's barricaded near classrooms. SWAT's too far. Negotiators are stalling, but we need eyes. We need you." Sarah's stomach knotted. A school, children. "How far?" she asked. 45 minutes by helicopter." The words were barely spoken before Sarah was moving, equipment case in hand. On the flight, the noise of the rotors drowned out everything, but inside her mind, silence pressed heavy. She thought of the playground in Cedar Falls, the mother shielding her kids, the terror in their eyes. She thought of her father's voice: "Mija, courage isn't about you. It's about them." When the helicopter touched down, the scene was chaos. Police cars lined the street, lights flashing red and blue against the snow. Parents screamed behind barricades, some collapsing in officers' arms, begging for their children. The school windows were dark. Inside, somewhere, one man held an entire community hostage. Santos led Sarah quickly to a makeshift command post. Maps of the school were spread across hoods of cars. Officers spoke into radios, their voices urgent, clipped. "Subject's name is Kyle Mason," Santos explained. 20 years old, expelled 2 years ago, history of violent outbursts. He brought a rifle into the school this morning. We've got teachers sheltering kids in classrooms, but he's near the West Hall. Negotiators made contact. He's unstable, paranoid. Keeps talking about being invisible, ignored. Sarah froze at that word, invisible. She looked toward the dark windows. Somewhere inside, a boy who once felt unseen was now screaming into the void. She knew that pain. She had lived it. Bullies at 11, tears on the swing, her father's hand on her shoulder. She swallowed hard. What's his demand? Santos shook her head. No clear demand, just rage. He wants to be heard. Sarah crouched by the maps, tracing with her finger. West Hall gives him line of sight to the cafeteria. Too many windows, if he moves there. Do you have the shot? Santos asked. Sarah looked up sharply. Detective, if I take it, he's dead. He's a kid. He's an armed suspect in a school full of children, Santos countered. If he fires. I know, Sarah cut in, her voice trembled. I know. Minutes later, Sarah lay prone on the roof of a nearby building. Her rifle rested steady, scope trained on a narrow West Hall window. Through the glass, shadows flickered. A figure paced, erratic, jerky. A rifle glinted in his hands. Her breath slowed, her world narrowed. Through the headset, a negotiator's voice bled in. Kyle, we're listening. Talk to us. Tell us what you want. A voice crackled back, raw with anger. You never listened before, you never cared. Sarah adjusted her scope, watching the boy's face appear, then vanish as he paced. He was sweating, pale, eyes wild. Not a monster, a broken child. Her finger brushed the trigger. Her chest ached. Mija, bravery isn't pulling the trigger. It's knowing when not to. Detective, Sarah whispered into the mic, he's scared. He doesn't want to kill them, not yet. Sarah, if he lifts that rifle. Give me time, she said firmly. The radio went silent. Through her scope, she watched him slam his fist against the wall, shout at shadows. His movements were wild but not focused. His finger wasn't on the trigger. He wanted attention, recognition. Sarah thought of herself at 11, crying on the swing, invisible. Her whisper was almost a prayer. Please, don't make me do this. Minutes dragged. Negotiators spoke gently, weaving words of hope, of listening. Sarah's crosshairs hovered at the boy's chest the entire time, her breathing steady, her heart breaking. Then it happened. He raised the rifle. Sarah's finger pressed. But instead of center mass, she shifted. In a split second, her shot struck metal, snapping through the weapon's sight. The rifle jerked out of his hands, clattering to the floor. Shouts erupted through the radio. Negotiators surged, seizing the opening. Kyle, put your hands up. No one else has to get hurt. Inside, the boy collapsed, sobbing. Hands lifted, empty. Officers rushed in seconds later, dragging him safely out. Children poured from classrooms, running into the arms of crying parents outside. Sarah lowered her rifle slowly. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were wet. On the ground, Detective Santos's voice filled her headset, low with awe. You didn't kill him. Sarah exhaled. He didn't need to die. He just needed someone to see him. Silence answered her, then finally respect. When Sarah climbed down, parents and officers stared. Not with fear, not even with awe, with gratitude. But Sarah didn't feel heroic. She felt tired, worn, broken and whole at once. As she walked back toward the helicopter, she whispered to herself, the same words her father had spoken years ago. Bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about protecting the people you love. She had loved those children without ever knowing them. And tonight, that had been enough. What happens when people start expecting you to be more than you are? Back at the library, Sarah tried to slip into her old rhythm. The children's section smelled of crayons and glue from the craft program. Elderly patrons lingered at the tables, swapping romance novels and mystery paperbacks. To them, she smiled softly, scanning their books like always. But even here in the quiet, the weight pressed down. Children giggled when she helped them, but some stared a little too long, their parents whispering nearby, "That's her. That's the librarian. The one who saved the school." The school. Sarah couldn't stop replaying it in her mind. The boy's pale face through her scope, the glint of his rifle, the sound of her bullet severing the weapon, leaving him alive. She had chosen restraint and it had worked. But what if it had? What if, while she hesitated, he had fired? The responsibility gnawed at her, sharper than the applause she received afterward. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table with her mother. Alina poured tea, her hands more steady now than in the days immediately after the shooting in Cedar Falls. "Mija," Alina said gently, "you're carrying too much alone." Sarah stirred her tea, staring at the swirling amber. "Papa carried it. I can too." Alina reached across, squeezing her hand. "But he carried it with your mother beside him. Who do you have?" Sarah wanted to answer, but silence filled the room instead. A week later, the FBI arrived. Not for an investigation this time, but for collaboration. Agent Rebecca Chen, the same woman who had grilled Sarah in the days after Cedar Falls, returned, this time with an entirely different purpose. "Miss Martinez," she said, shaking her hand firmly at headquarters, "we've been reviewing your work with the state police. Your restraint in Millbrook, your precision, it's rare. I'll be working with you on tactical assessments going forward." Her voice was steady, professional, but there was something beneath it, respect, maybe even admiration. Over the following months, Sarah and Rebecca worked side by side. Sarah provided overwatch, Rebecca coordinated negotiations. Their rhythm surprised them both. In tense situations, Rebecca trusted Sarah without hesitation. And Sarah, for the first time since her father, felt someone truly understood the weight of her choices. One evening after a long case, a barricaded suspect who had surrendered without shots fired, Rebecca sat with her outside the command post, sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup. "You know," Rebecca said, "most people see what you did in Cedar Falls as one moment of heroism, but I see 12 years of discipline, of training, of sacrifice. That kind of preparation doesn't come easy." Sarah looked at her, startled. Few had ever acknowledged the years behind the moment. "Papa taught me. Frank kept me steady, that's all." Rebecca shook her head. "No, you kept yourself steady. Most people break under that kind of weight. You didn't." Sarah wanted to deny it, but instead she found herself looking away, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Their bond deepened slowly, quietly. At first, long conversations about tactics, then about life, about what it meant to serve without recognition, about what it cost to be strong when no one else could be. Sarah found herself looking forward to those conversations, more than she ever admitted. But outside, the world kept pressing in. Media requests never stopped. Letters arrived from strangers across the country, some from veterans thanking her for honoring the skills their brothers carried, some from young women asking how they could train, some from families grateful she had given them a story of hope in a world drowning in violence. Frank Morrison became a minor celebrity himself, giving interviews about training the librarian sniper. He used the spotlight to advocate for mental health support for veterans, for responsible firearms training. "Sarah proves skill can be a force for good," he told USA Today. Sarah winced when she read it. She loved Frank like family, but she never wanted to be a symbol. At the library, her coworkers adjusted in different ways. Mrs. Patterson had retired, saying she wanted to spend more time with her grandchildren after seeing how fragile life could be. The new head librarian, Jennifer Walsh, was younger, enthusiastic, and openly admired Sarah. "I tell people I work with a real superhero," she joked one day, laughing. "Except instead of a cape, she stamps books and keeps a rifle in her trunk." Sarah forced a laugh. Inside, she hated the word hero, superhero, those weren't hers. She drove to the quarry that night, lying on the cold ground beneath the stars. She fired until her shoulder ached, each shot perfect, each echo sharp against stone walls, but peace didn't come. Instead, she found herself whispering into the night. "Papa, am I becoming something I should? Or am I just becoming what you always knew?" The stars offered no answer. The months bled together. Cedar Falls changed, too. The town carried a strange mixture of pride and unease. Pride that their librarian had saved them. Unease that danger had come so close, and that their quiet Sarah wasn't who they thought. Tom Bradley, now promoted to chief, spoke openly at his ceremony. "Sarah taught us all something. Heroes don't always look like what we expect. Sometimes the person who saves you is the one you see every day and never really notice." The words echoed in Sarah's mind long after. She hated them and loved them all at once. Because deep down she still wanted to be unnoticed, invisible. But that life was gone forever. One evening, Rebecca walked with her after another long case. The air was cool, their boots crunching on gravel. "Sarah," Rebecca said carefully, "do you ever regret it, that first shot?" Sarah froze, her breath caught. Rebecca turned toward her, eyes soft but searching. "I don't mean the life saved. I mean, do you regret stepping into the light?" Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes. To say she longed for the days of anonymity, of books and silence. But another truth rose instead, painful and clear. "I regret that it had to happen," she whispered. "But not that I acted, because if I hadn't, those children wouldn't be alive." Rebecca nodded slowly. That's the answer of someone who understands sacrifice. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. But as they stood together in the quiet, Sarah felt the question burn deeper inside her. Was this the life she wanted? Or the life the world had forced her into? How much can one person carry before it breaks them? The call came on a rainy night. Sarah was at the library, locking up, the scent of damp paper filling the air. Her phone buzzed with a number she recognized instantly, Detective Santos. "Sarah," Santos's voice was tight, urgent, "we've got a situation. Downtown, federal courthouse, hostage siege, multiple shooters, tactical units are stretched thin. We need you now." Sarah's stomach knotted. She had faced lone gunmen, unstable souls begging to be seen. But multiple shooters, organized and deliberate. This was war, not desperation. Within an hour, she was on the rooftop across from the courthouse, rain dripping from her cap, rifle steady against the wet concrete. Next to her lay Rebecca Chen, radio crackling softly, eyes sharp with determination. Inside, chaos. A domestic terror cell had stormed the courthouse, trapping more than 50 hostages. Lawyers, clerks, a judge, families waiting on cases. The shooters had demands, but they were scattered, uncoordinated, shouting about government betrayal, justice denied. Through her scope, Sarah saw them packing near windows, rifles slung, anger in every movement. They weren't kids. They weren't lost. They were trained. Rebecca's voice cut through the storm. "Sarah, we're not getting negotiations. They're threatening to start executing in minutes." Sarah's chest tightened. 50 lives, no time, no safe path. She whispered into the rain, almost to herself, "Papa, I don't know if I can carry this one." But she lined up anyway. Her first shot took the leader at the window. Clean. Instant. The man dropped, weapon clattering to the floor. The second shot, seconds later, disabled the rifle of another before he could fire into the hostages. Screams erupted inside. Chaos followed. Officers surged at the entrance, breaching. Gunfire thundered, echoing against courthouse walls. Sarah's scope darted from window to window, precision cutting down threats before they could turn their rage on the innocent. One shooter grabbed a hostage, dragging her toward the glass. Sarah's pulse pounded. Through her scope, she saw terror in the woman's eyes. She exhaled, steady. One shot through the shoulder, precise enough to drop the man without killing him. The hostage broke free, stumbling into officers' arms. Each choice cut into her deeper than the last. because these weren't just paper targets. Each was a life ended or spared, balanced on her trigger. Minutes stretched like hours, then silence. The building cleared. Officers confirmed hostages alive, shooters down or in custody. Sarah lowered her rifle. Her hands were still steady, but her heart was breaking. Rebecca touched her shoulder, her voice low. "You saved them all, every last one." Sarah shook her head. "I killed, that's all they'll see." Rebecca leaned closer. "No, they'll see what I see. A woman who carried the weight so no one else had to." The words sank deep. Days later, Cedar Falls held another gathering, but this time Sarah refused to stand on the stage. She stayed in the back, watching quietly as survivors thanked first responders, as families cried in relief. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. She only needed to know they were alive. That night, sitting alone on the porch, Sarah finally opened her father's old journal. She had never been able to before, the grief too raw, the words too heavy. But tonight, she needed his voice. The leather was worn, pages filled with his sharp handwriting, notes on windage, breathing, scope adjustments. But near the back, a passage written just months before his death. "Mija, if you ever read this, it means I'm gone. I hope you never had to use what I taught you. But if you did, I hope you remember this: dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for recognition. Dignity acts quietly with love. And if your skill ever saves lives, don't let the world twist it into glory. Let it remain what it is: sacrifice. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to bear the weight others can't." Sarah's eyes blurred with tears. She closed the journal against her chest, breathing deep. For the first time since Cedar Falls, she felt a strange peace. Not joy, not relief, but clarity. Her life would never again be invisible. She would never again be only the librarian, unseen behind her desk. The world had seen her now. The world had asked of her what she never wished to give. But she could choose how to carry it, quietly, with dignity, with restraint. In the months that followed, Sarah returned to the library, to the quarry, to headquarters. She trained recruits in patience, in breath, in discipline. She taught them the same lesson her father had taught her, that the weapon was never about power. It was about responsibility. Rebecca became more than a colleague, more than a friend. Slowly, carefully, Sarah allowed herself to trust, to lean, to share the weight. And when the next call came, and it always came, she was ready. Not because she wanted to be, but because others needed her to be. Her story spread far beyond Cedar Falls, whispered in academies, studied in training rooms, told around kitchen tables by families who lived because of her. But Sarah never told it herself. She never wrote the book publishers begged for. She never took the stage. Instead, she kept to her father's final lesson. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.